Hello and welcome to a special edition of Eavesdropping at the Movies. We were invited to the University of Warwick Film and Television Studies Department by Julie Lobalzo Wright, so thank you to her. And we had a conversation that was chaired by James MacDowell, thank you to him.
Thank you, yeah.
For the benefit of students and staff alike about the history of the podcast. It's been going now since 2017. We've got 400 odd podcasts under our belt, about where it came from, why we do it, the kind of things that go into making it, our sort of philosophies behind it, all that kind of thing. So it's a kind of state of the podcast in a way for us. We haven't done that in a very long time. And it was great to be able to speak to everyone and have such a kind of receptive and interested audience.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun.
To whom we're very grateful. So what you'll hear is a conversation that took place between us, James, and the audience.
Yes.
Well, thank you for coming, those who have. So this is, I imagine this would just be a sort of a free-flowing conversation between Jose Arroyo and Mike Glass about Eavesdropping at the Movies. Their podcast, which I was trying to figure it out online. Did it start in 2017?
Yeah, sort of second half of 2017. August was when you came to me and said, "Oh, I want to do a podcast."
Oh, right.
And we saw a couple of films and sort of tried it out. We saw, what was that film with Kumail Nanjiani where he gets cancer, his wife gets cancer.
The Big Sick?
The Big Sick, that's the one. So we saw that and we did a podcast on that, which I think no one's heard. We kept that to ourselves. I think you might have put it out to your friends on Facebook and said, "What do you think?" And some feedback came back. And then we did another one on Girls Trip. Again, didn't put that one out, but then we started putting them out. I think the first one we did was that Stephen King Gunslinger adaptation. I can't remember what it was called now.
I can't remember either. And
it wasn't great.
Yeah.
It was our first foray into not liking Idris Elba on screen,
right?
Which we've done a lot since.
Yes, we want to. You know, he's great on TV. Yeah, but I just can't get him on a big screen, really.
Yeah, The Dark Tower. That's what it was called.
Oh, that's right.
It was all right. How I end up with most of them. It was all right. You know, see some time.
Anyway, so I mean, one reason why it's nice to host this is because Jose taught me as when I was an undergrad, and then Michael was actually my first ever seminars that I taught at Warwick. When I was a teaching assistant on, I think it would have been Hollywood cinema.
Yeah.
In your second year as an undergrad and my second year as a PhD. So we have sort of three generations of Warwick people, one after the other. But it did make me wonder how you went from staff, student to friends to the podcast. Like what's your personal history, because the podcast is clearly built around a friendship. So how did that develop?
Well, I think for me, basically, it was the way that, I don't know, education is structured here somehow is I live in Birmingham. Birmingham is so close to Coventry, right? Very few graduates end up in Birmingham, right? Everybody either returns to their hometown or goes to London, right? Or, I don't know where they go. Yeah. But I think Mike was pretty much the only...
Well, I already live locally. I'm from Solihull.
Yeah, so, he was in or around Birmingham. Yeah, very close. And so it was a convenient way
of... friend.
Well, it began by, this desire to see movies with someone, and he's around, right? And then actually I think it developed out of, a continued desire to do that and to talk about movies and so on. I mean, that's really, I think, what made us friends, really. And we did become friends. And
we didn't see each other very much before we started the podcast. I mean, like I was all ready to go, he was a teacher, and you don't have a relationship with your teachers.
Yes.
And it's gone. And like we had seen each other once or twice. I remember Dan Montanarini, who was a guy in my class. Yeah. He was making some film or other. And
for Stephen, or he mentioned doing something for Stephen at that moment.
Is that right? And that's when we were filming at your flat.
Yes.
So, and then he invited me round, and you made us Beetroot.
Yeah.
And And I was going, this is weird to be in a teacher's flat. you know.
Yes.
But then obviously we would see each other once, twice after that for whatever reason. But it was you saying, I want to do a podcast,
Right.
that started it off.
Yeah, you see, I even forget that it was my idea, right?
Yeah.
I actually, I thought that it might have come from Mike, really, because, you know, I've never been like particularly technically adept, right? But I'm glad it came from me. It's had so many like incredible uses, right? One of which, and, you know, highly prized, is really kind of creating and establishing all kinds of Warwick connections around the podcast, right? Because, I mean, one of the things that I find that is that if current students listen to it, I really don't know, yeah, unless they're asked to it. But what often happens is you meet people, yeah, in London or abroad, or yeah, and, you know, they mention about listening to the podcast and how nostalgic they feel for, you know, Warwick classes, or I suppose, I don't know, the way that we talk or the depth in which we talk.
I imagine they probably remember you quite fondly.
Well, I hope.
They'd like hearing your voice.
I hope. But I think that there is also something about the particular kind of discussion that kind of brings out these connections. I think.
Well, hopefully it's an intelligent discussion. I mean, that's what, I do think it's maybe.
Well, that's the aim.
Yeah. But like, I think when you get two people who are, fairly intelligent and sort of know what they're talking about, even though the films we don't necessarily know what we're seeing until we see it, we kind of want to go in kind of blank a lot of the time. But we do have things that we know, Yeah, I was a teacher, I went to university here, and it's an interest. And I do think that a lot of similar criticism, especially podcast type criticism, because it's quite easy to do these days. Quite easy to get. You can do it on your phone. Record a podcast with your mates, and I think a podcast is essentially like your favorite conversation that you have with your friend recorded. That's really what it is between us, and I think that's why it sort of hopefully sounds entertaining and interesting, and you want to hear people talk about what they're interested in. But I do think that the kind of things that we talk about, or the way we talk about films, is hopefully a little bit smarter or a little bit different to what you hear in other places, because we tend not to be talking about, sort of what's next for Marvel.
Yeah.
Whatever.
Well, it is. I mean, this is why the title is genius. The eavesdropping. It does feel like eavesdropping on a very smart conversation between two people who know, a great deal, but who are talking casually as one might walking out of the cinema. Yeah.
The title is mine. Yeah, and I have a story. Yeah, which Mike is bored with. But like, I was an immigrant kid who liked to go to the movies, which means I went alone, right? And yeah, it was just that pre-tween moment, really. And I always had like this desperation to talk about it, right? So, and actually a story that might interest you, Julie, I remember going, I think it was to the main event of some Barbra Streisand movie, right? And just eavesdropping on people queuing, right? Kind of, discussing Barbra Streisand before the movie, or, and then actually when leaving the film, because you had no one else to talk to about the film, yeah, it was like this sense of, I don't know, a kind of a longing for a connection, yeah, that you got a hint of by eavesdropping, but also there's something, I don't know, socially transgressive about eavesdropping. You're not meant to, right? So the whole idea of this podcast is that you give permission, yeah, to people listening in, yeah, to conversations that they might like to hear, but not be able to participate in, at least initially. I mean, there's always room for participation in comments or, emails or whatever. But that was, that's where it came from a personal longing of a lack I once had, right? And which I think I still have. Like, if it wasn't for Mike, the current situation about film going right now is very difficult to get people to go with you. Yeah, if you want to see something, you often go alone, or you just miss it, right? So actually, kind of, this desire or this longing for conversation, is kind of where that stems from.
Speaking of which, should we listen to a little bit of a clip of an episode? I've got it up on here. I thought it'd be a good idea to have a listen to a bit of an episode. So this is one on. I think I misspelled it on the PowerPoint, I realised. Argyle So I asked for a recommendation of an episode that Mike felt got into the sort of critical conversation, quite sort of speedily, and this one definitely does. And it captures exactly, I think, some of the spirit of the the intelligent conversation on which one is eavesdropping. So let's listen to like the first 5 minutes or so.
Hello and welcome to Eavesdropping at the Movies. I'm Mike.
And I'm Jose.
And today we've seen Argylle, which has been taking a bit of a beating sort of online and critically. People don't really seem to like it. I was prepared for the worst. It's directed by Matthew Vaughn, who's previously done Kingsman, and he was also known for being Guy Ritchie's producer back in the day.
It's interesting because the films resemble Guy Ritchie films.
Yeah, how do you reckon?
What was the last film, the Guy Ritchie film with Henry Cavill as the Spider-Man from U.N.C.L.E.?
Oh yeah.
Right. It's glamorous, it's slightly retro, it has ideas of Britishness, it's fast-moving, it's cheeky, or it's tongue-in-cheek. Yeah, it's fun, it's really kind of nothing serious. So I think it has a lot in common with those films, though I do think Guy Ritchie's films have more of a punch.
Yeah, I think he's a better director.
Yeah.
Although I do think for someone who began producing and has moved into directing, I do tend to I think I go to Matthew Vaughn films thinking they're not going to be very good, and I end up having quite a good time, and that was the case with this one. And there is something more to it than everyone is responding to. It's not making very much money from what I understand, although I mean the budget I think has been over-reported. It's reported this is $200 million. It can't possibly be. That I think is what Apple bought it for. It's not the same as what it cost to make. Still, it doesn't look like it's going to make very much money, and it's taking kind of a beating. So let's just say briefly what it's about. It's about this author who writes spy novels, played by Bryce Dallas Howard, and her novel appears to have come to life in some sense. She writes about this spy, played in the film by Henry Cavill, called Argylle, and we see these spy scenes playing out. The film opens with a classic spy action opening. There's all sorts of kind of Bond and Man from U.N.C.L.E. and things like that going on. It turns out that spies are after her, and she's got herself embroiled in something. Any more than that would be spoiler territory. We will get into spoiler territory very quickly. I was pretty charmed by the whole thing, more than I expected to be.
I think it's a mess. I think it's too long. I thought the cast was ill-used, and in spite of that, it had some really fun moments. Yeah. I mean,
when you get to those action scenes towards the end, especially the one where they're using smoke to cover themselves and they're shooting and they're dancing at the same time, I thought this is really imaginative and a lot of fun. It's well choreographed. I love the look of it. No one else is doing things like this.
I love the idea of it. I thought it was poorly executed.
Yeah.
I love the skating bit.
Yeah, skating was great.
That was like thrilling. Actually, it was so much fun.
I was just in it, Like I thought, if I'd been in a bad mood coming up to this, I'd have thought, "Wow, this is stupid." But I was in a good mood coming up to it. I was into the movie, and this was all just working for me really well. And I found it really funny and exciting and
kind of
witty.
I kind of agree with you, right? Like it has those things, but I think one can't get rid of the things that I thought didn't work. So, for example, the biggest star in the film is arguably Cavill, right? And John Cena. And, they're used as kind of background imaginary figures. And, particularly Cavill is meant to be the ideal imaginary version of...
Argylle, the spy?
Argylle is meant to be the ideal, her ideal anyway. And then it turns out that he's sometimes shown to be the ideal of Sam Rockwell, right? Yeah, kind of they're juxtaposed with each other in action sequences. And, so kind of theoretically it makes sense, on paper it makes sense. But then you have Cavill with the worst haircut I've ever seen in a major star in the cinema, wearing ill-fitting clothes that make him look fat, right? So
the clothes weren't
those
great,
things bothered me, really.
There was dialogue that pointed out the clothes at one point, something about the suits that he wears, and I thought the suit didn't look great though. It didn't. There was one particular shot, a full body shot of him stood there, and it didn't look great. And I thought that's a real that's an error, you know.
Well, for a Kingsman film that pays so much attention to British tailoring,
Yeah.
and, you know, things being so precise, and
needed to be better than that.
yeah,
The haircut I liked. You know, I thought it's silly. Liked it.
I didn't. I thought it made him look unattractive, and it's a really bad haircut.
Yeah, it's great.
Well, not see.
I wanted to get to the disagreement about the haircut. Well, no, because I think it does capture the way that your conversations are often, you know, they're obviously based in personal response and pleasure and taste and things like that. But you're always like, you're reaching for kind of context and justifications and challenging each other. You know, you went through like industrial context from the, you know, people seem to be objecting based on its budget. You know, and then, you know, you have, well, the problem is, you know, in a film that is part of this series, that suit is a problem, that haircut is a problem in this context, you know.
Yes.
But you're always kind of like pushing at each other to kind of like back up, and you get into specific details in a way that I think often you don't in like more like review kind of podcasts, you know, like you'll be like, there was this one moment, this one shot where he looked really bad.
Yes.
You know, and or like you're talking about the smoke, and like you're getting into like these particular moments of style, really.
Yeah. I really enjoyed doing that. I mean, that comes naturally to me, and I think to you.
Yes.
And it comes from, you know, having studied here, and it's the kind of thing we do is close textual analysis. So even though, you know, I suppose with the podcast being on YouTube, although they're not filmed, I suppose we could use clips, but then they're also with films that have only just come out. It's not really the way we do it. It's supposed to just be audio. So it's about describing what you've seen and hopefully remembering it accurately enough.
Yes. And obviously it's based on one viewing, right? And it's a blind viewing. But I mean, one of the things that I love about Mike is actually that real attention to shots and moving camera and being able to describe what it does, right? So, and I did think that's one of the things that we could provide. I mean, I often had to, because Mike tends to make a joke of everything, but I did often have to insist we are providing things that I think other people aren't or find it difficult to provide, right? Which is like a lifetime of knowledge about cinema. Kind of, you know, you're trying to make it accessible. We could have framed this discussion in different ways. Around narrative, around world building, around the presentation of stars, right? And, you know, found that, so it's a more colloquial language, but that is kind of what we're doing. And what we like to do and what we do think other people weren't providing. And the forum of the podcast is, as Mike often tells me, it can be as long as we want. Like, you know, kind of people don't have to listen. Like, you know, we're not making any money out of it, right? So actually, kind of, we're doing what we want, what we like to do. I think kind of we are doing something that is difficult to find elsewhere, which is, you know, why people listen, right? And we have no constraints around that, right? At the same time, we want to make it accessible. And I had another goal, really. Well, two, but which are the same thing. I sometimes think I'm losing my mind and I'm forgetting so many things, right? And that actually the podcast is a record of how you responded to the film, right? And responded kinetically, because we do make a point of not reading anything. Like, I'll often go completely blind, right? So I'm going to the movies with Mike. I have no idea what we're seeing. Right, which is why I sometimes can't remember the title of the film in the podcast.
You don't know what you're going to see before you show
Very
up
often Jose doesn't. Very often I'm the one who's picking out this is what I'm saying when, and we were, you know, I okay it with him. You know, we're seeing Argyle at 5:20 and so and he'll go and then but then all he really remembers is I've got to meet him at the cinema at 5:20.
That's right. Okay, and then we go to my house directly. We don't talk about what we've seen until we start talking on the mic, right? Like, you know, I'll make coffee or whatever. I'll offer Mike some food. He'll reject it, and then we just sit down and talk. Right?
And do you try and not say anything to each other about the film in between leaving the cinema and turning the mic?
Yeah.
I was going to say, and that must be tricky sometimes.
There's always something else to talk about.
Yeah.
You know, some fucking idiot who had his phone on in the cinema.
Yeah.
No, it's not too tricky. I mean, it's only a short walk. Well, we tend to drive back to Jose's anyway because I drive into Birmingham. So it's not too tricky to hold off chatting. We know we'll have plenty to say when we get to it.
Yes.
That is actually something that I like about the podcast is you quite often talk about the cinema going experience itself and like what was the screen like, what were the speakers like, what was the audience like.
That was also deliberate because, I don't think we set out to do this, but over time, it kind of became a goal of mine to kind of build up a personal, but nonetheless social archive of film going in the Midlands, right? We've been to every cinema pretty much that existed from the time that we've gone. We've seen some of them closed down. We talk about the projection, whether it's cold, whether, so for example, a lot of the screenings and events that we podcast on from the Electric, the Electric is now in question, right? So, I think, and now I don't know how many podcasts we've done, but like 450 or something. Or
I wrote down 441.
441, right? So, so I do think it is kind of like an archive of Birmingham film going. It's very site specific, right? And that was also kind of, at least, part of my, I don't know, a desire to do something that didn't come from London and wasn't fucking addressed to London, right? Like it seems so much of a kind of a British cultural life is really a London conversation. Yeah. About things that become part of that. I mean, the films are released nationally. We're mainly all seeing the same films. Actually, the problem becomes if you're interested in more art cinema or auteur cinema, they often arrive in Birmingham 8 months after London, if at all, right?
And not at the biggest cinemas usually.
Yeah.
I mean, when you talk about being site-specific, it's also site-specific in the sense that we complain about having to go to other cities to see IMAX films.
True.
Birmingham no longer has one.
Yes.
Yeah,
though it did. Yeah. So, but anyway, those are also elements that I think I'm glad we've done the podcast because, I mean, those elements are there. If somebody at some point wants to do something with those dimensions that are not actually about film criticism or about film reviewing, but are also about the city, about film going in this particular city, right?
I have lots more that I could ask, but I did ask you guys if you wanted to come with a question or two that you would always wanted to ask each other about the podcast. I don't know whether that's happened or not. It's we then open it up to the audience. But do you have any questions you wanted to pose to one another?
Well, I was sort of curious to ask you, because you used to review films when you were much younger in Montreal.
Yes.
And how much of kind of the stuff that we do you were putting into practice then, or how things have changed?
I mean, it's completely different. And actually, and again, one of the reasons why this podcast is so attractive to me, right, is because, and it's no longer like this, but I remember, for example, being very young and very stupid and writing for the McGill Daily and being offered a trip to LA for the launch of 2010 A Space Odyssey, the sequel, right, to A Space Odyssey, and kind of, and turning it down, right, which I would not do now, right, because my thinking then was, well, that's so corrupt, right, like, how can you write something negative if you've just enjoyed a week's vacation in LA at somebody's expense, right, and, how that went against the tenets of journalism and things like that. Right. I mean, now I'd probably go and then write a shitty review, which would be, kind of the logical thing to do. But anyway, then I was caught up with those questions. But all of this to say that, there was a whole industry. I mean, I tell this to my students, when you went to review an Almodovar film, you received these glossy press packages, right, with pictures, that you could then use in your publication, with the synopsis, right, with often Almodovar would tell you what his intentions were about the film, what the influences were about the film, and then you'd read these things, and I swear almost all the review would be summarized from the press package, right, and what you get is a set of opinions, right. So two things. I mean, that is reviewing. It's not necessarily film criticism, right? But, I thought the podcast was an opportunity to engage more deeply, right? To engage in a way that's kind of not connected to any of those, that's not responding to a kind of a discourse that is already structured kind of commercially, by the distributors for the press, and that the press always falls into, right? Because, I mean, I did review and reviewing and criticism in different contexts. And I remember, for example, going to review for Sight and Sound. And, you'd go to these studio screenings at, the Warner's building on Wardour Street or whatever. And you'd show up. And of course, all the press representatives would be there, and they'd have coffee and donuts, and they might sometimes offer you wine or whatever, and you'd go there and there'd be all the major reviewers, which at that time there would be about 40 or 50 people in the 90s that would turn up to a press screening for a film, right? And you're already not responding, to the film, right? Like, and actually it was amazing because I didn't even know these people at the time, but you just, would know there's a hierarchy of responses, right? Like if Philip French is laughing, it's like, the room is paying attention. But it's somehow, if you're thinking something different, you're already responding to, So, I mean, those kinds of things somehow inhibit just, I don't know, a kind of an honest, well-informed response, right? So I thought, that was something kind of worth developing, and that the format provided a rare opportunity. Like, you can just do it. Whether people listen or not, that was and is ever the question, really. Like, but that you could bypass it, and put it out in public. Was already something that seemed kind of magical to me, right? That wasn't possible before. I mean, before you'd have to be chosen, and so on, and paid, and wanted, or sought out, or you'd have to make yourself known before you're even put in a position to say something, right? So I'm rambling now.
those aspects of context that you're talking about, not being able to be, saying, well, this movie was provided for me, I was given coffee and everything, and that kind of affects your view of it. There's lots of elements. I mean, you heard in the clip just now, I was saying in a different mood, I wouldn't have liked this very much.
Sure.
So, but at least we can be honest about, these elements of the experience were beneficial, these weren't, whatever. But we get to talk about all of that. I mean, that's some of the stuff that I think is most fun to talk about, because it really is just about your experience. I mean, so much of it is about explaining experience. I think, like, why did I feel like this, and trying to work that out. And some of it will come down to, I was thirsty, but some of it will come down to, this particular shot was framed in this way or whatever. And as long as you can kind of pay attention to, and sometimes we don't, sometimes you can't remember. I don't know why I felt this, but I just know that I did. And that can be worth kind of making a note of it, making a record of it, you say. Like, this made me feel like this at this time, even if I can't quite explain it right now. I enjoy doing that.
And like with everything else, I mean, I don't know if you feel this, but, if you go to a movie alone and you go home, you've seen the movie, but it's rare. I mean, unless it's a particular kind of film that has a particular kind of effects on you, you often don't think it through. Like, you've experienced it and you've put it aside, right? So I think the podcast is also an opportunity to think things through in a way that you don't normally do, right? Which comes out of dialogue, right? And actually, I think, so many things get done out of friendship, out of shared ideas, and, and that's one of the things that, Mike will say something I hadn't thought about it, and all of a sudden you have a whole series of thoughts on it, right? That would never have occurred to you unless someone had sparked that idea.
Number of times I come back and I'm thinking, I don't think I've got anything to say about this film.
Yes.
I can't think of anything.
2 hours later.
And then we'll just get going. And so, we have done podcasts that were 2 hours long, very occasionally.
Yes.
They're mostly in the sort of 30-minute range, 30, 45-minute range. But we don't limit ourselves on unless we go, oh, we've got another film to go to.
Yes.
Like our Coco podcast is very short, because I think we had another film to go to, and we could have done another hour on that, because that was such a wonderful film.
What was the one we did with your brother?
Just recently we did The Bruce List, and that was one where we went to London.
That was almost as long as the movie.
That was one where we took a trip to London. It was partly because my brother is a crazy movie fan, even more and being in London, he gets all the opportunities to see a lot of things that I don't necessarily hear. And he'd already seen the Brutus, and he was like, "You've got to come and see it. It's fantastic." And we saw it on a 70mm screening at the BFI because the film had been shot in VistaVision, so that allowed it to be shown off better than a 35mm screening would have done, or DCP. And actually, one of the things we commented on was that the screening wasn't quite as great as it could have been because the cinema was quite small. But the conversation made the whole thing completely worth. I mean, the film was worth it anyway, but like we could have seen it in Birmingham and had it be worth it. But the conversation was fantastic because he's such a great participant, and when he's got something that he wants to talk about, he's great. But I spent the first 40 minutes of that conversation not saying very much.
Yes.
And you two were going at it, and it was great. But I was going, man, I don't think I could think anything about this film right now. You know, I don't know what it was.
Yes. But I think one of the things that comes out of a conversation, right, is this thing of shared feelings, right? So one of the things about The Brutalist was, you know, when at this moment in the film, I felt this way. Did you? And why do you think it was, right? So kind of there are all these intimations of violation, right, in that film that are never shown, right? And you sometimes think, is it just me? Am I projecting? Right? And as soon as you realize that it becomes a shared thing, then you begin to wonder about how the film conveys that. Right? Yeah. So it is communicating that. It's not just you interpreting that, right? So it becomes a different kind of conversation about the film.
And if you hadn't had the discussion, you wouldn't actually have had that evidence to draw upon in your assessment as you look back on the film.
Yeah.
You know, in your memory, you might have thought, I wonder if that was just me.
Yes.
You know, if you didn't have that conversation. But because you did, it's like you've crowdsourced a discovery about some kind of strategy in the film.
And you just naturally wouldn't have thought about it as deeply as you would on your own. You might have spent a few minutes thinking about it, gone away, having a conversation. You naturally, as you were saying, kind of you find things to think that you didn't realise you were working on, but it comes out in conversation. And I think the thing that I enjoy the most, or I think is most valuable about the way we talk about films on the podcast, is that it comes out of feeling so much of it. How does it make you feel? Because that's how films operate, right? They're not essays.
Yes.
You know, they're not. I mean, they want to make you think, and you know, there's documentary and things, but films operate on a level of feeling. It made me feel a certain way. Now, can I interrogate that? And I think a lot of criticism doesn't think about it that way. I mean, a lot of criticism, like professional criticism, is like goes from the press pack and it goes, here are the actors and here's the plot synopsis, and I thought this was good and this was bad. And it's not very in depth, a lot of it. And then a lot of other stuff, it just goes, is it good or is it bad? You know, and I think I kind of slightly struggle to say something is just bad. It's like, I didn't like this, right? That's not the same thing. And why didn't I like it? Why didn't it work for me?
Yes.
Yeah, it's not the same thing.
So I think that might be a limitation in our podcast, in the sense that, I mean, you know, I've grown to love theater and I go to it a lot now, you know, but there was a point where I almost kind of didn't trust the experience of theater. It was like, you know, such a job to go see it, and it was so expensive. It was such an event. Yeah, I grew up in Canada, and it was just really expensive and so on. But if it wasn't great, I don't know, you felt terrible, right? Whereas film going was always something casual. I mean, the things that I loved about cinema is it doesn't have to be great, right? Like, if you love Goldie Hawn, she's in a shitty movie, she'll have 5 wonderful moments. It's worth going to, right? Like, is that, yeah, like, you know, it's that, I think, that Buñuel code that, you know, every lousy movie has 5 great minutes, right? And very few kind of, you know, commercial movies have more than 5 great minutes, is his argument. I'm more generous with that. I mean, I find lots of things to like, in movies. Movies are not something outrageous or expensive or whatever. You know, we have our Cineworld pass and we'll occasionally go to other things. And, you know, I'm sure it's not the same kind of for young people now, right? But I'm of that generation that, like, you know, movies, the individual movie doesn't have to be great for film going to be a great experience, right? Yeah.
It's just you love the medium.
I love the medium.
It's that cinephilia. It's
It
like
is.
you're going to find things because it's just good to watch films.
Yes.
Which is why I object to watching Netflix films.
Yes,
which we've had this conversation
that's a
before.
bone of contention.
Yeah, because I think what you were just saying to me in the car on the way here, the only causes worth fighting are lost causes, right? We've got to fight for the cinema experience. It's worth going to the
That's
cinema.
true.
And that's what I want it to be about.
That's true, but I still think we're missing something by not discussing that which people are watching.
Maybe. But I mean, really, what on Netflix, in film at least, has lasted? You know? What's made a splash, what's lasted? Bird Box was big for a bit because people were doing the Bird Box challenge on TikTok.
Well, there have been other things. I mean,
Irishman.
We saw that.
We saw that after cinema.
I was going to say, so you don't mean just films that were produced for Netflix. You mean you won't watch it on Netflix?
I'm sort of a bit of both. I mean, when we did the Irishman podcast, there was actually a very long conversation, which I cut down significantly because it got really boring, which was a conversation about how Martin Scorsese had previously spoken about Marvel films not being cinema.
Yeah.
And this was like a very big news, and people, and a lot of Marvel fans got very offended about it. But then he was making a film for Netflix, and Netflix is, like, really, as I see it, anti-cinema. Like, they'll put their films in the cinema because they have to, because that's what gets them a bit of legitimacy and eligibility for awards and things. But they don't. But they're a streaming company. They don't want to be in cinemas, really. And so I was saying, does that go against? He's saying this isn't cinema, and it's sort of implying. I don't think he really stated, implying it's not to be respected on the same level as what I really respect. But he's then taking money from a company which is trying to kill cinema, really. And then there was a long conversation about, because he disagreed with me completely.
Yes.
and then actually I cut it down a lot. And then one of our listeners said, you got to cut it down more. It was really boring. So I did.
I have one more question maybe before we go to audience questions, which is, like, given that you're sort of talking there a little bit about, like, what other reviews do differently and so on. I was just curious if you had any models or things that you were either wanting to emulate or avoid in when you were coming up with the idea of the podcast. Like, did you take inspiration from any existing either podcasts or radio or anything in terms of film discussion, and were there any, like, cliches or things you wanted to avoid and make sure, we don't want to do that kind of show?
It's funny, I don't remember thinking anything along those lines. I mean, there were reviews that I would read, and I used to listen to Kermode and Mayo on 5 Live, and but they were doing something different to what we were kind of naturally going to do. Like, it was obvious we were going to do things that were more in depth or longer than they had the opportunity to be, and they were doing it for a different reason, for a different audience, and also you had, it's just one guy giving the review there, and then Mayo will chip in with something.
Yeah, exactly.
It's not
really a conversation.
It's not a conversation. That's what we want it to be. But I'm really glad that we'd started doing the podcast before COVID, because that's when everyone started doing a podcast. And so it would have looked like we were real, like, bandwagoners. But we got in just before.
I don't mind that either. I mean, one of the things I would say is that a format developed. Because I think we were we so weren't thinking about other people and other models that we were missing out the basic stuff.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
Like, welcome to, like,
hello, welcome.
Yeah, because you've developed little things that you will always say at the beginning and the end.
And at the end, yeah.
So when you listen to the first 40-ish podcasts, you'll notice that the hello and welcome to Eavesdropping at the Movies sounds really different to the rest of it. It's because we weren't doing it then. I went back and added those on once we realised we probably should be doing. Again, it was a listener who said you probably need to do that.
Yeah.
And I went back and added them on. So, those were all, I got a bunch from podcasts that we'd already done and just copied them to the start of those first 40 or so. It was rubbish at the start.
But even more essential, which you just think, what kind of fool are you, is so Mike now does a little bit of a plot description of, this is what we've seen, right? So that, any listener who has seen the film or hasn't seen the film, can connect the rest of the conversation to, the basic plot of it. I mean, we weren't even doing that at the beginning. So actually, it's kind of, that is what Mike does at the beginning of each podcast, right? It's kind of gives the basic outline of the film.
Announcing spoilers before you plow right in.
Yes, again.
As long as I remember. Yeah. Again, that's something, I mean, there are times when we'll go, at the end of a podcast, I'll remember that I hadn't put in a spoiler bit. So I'll record an extra bit right at the end, cut that in at the start somewhere.
Yeah.
I will take care to do those kind of things. I mean, I do sort of like, I do think the podcasts fundamentally should be kind of homebrew and amateur and that sort of thing. And I kind of find professional podcasting really weird. When you've got like, sort of the rest is politics selling out the O2 and things. I don't understand when people making money off them. I kind of think it should just be for you and your mate, and you're the only ones who listen. And it's like a garage thing for you, which has always been the way I've treated it essentially.
Yes.
But there is still that element of, okay, we do appreciate that there's got to be someone listening to this, and you do have to have a modicum of, okay, there's an intro, there's I'll kind of praise it. I mean, it's always me, because I guess it's just natural for me to be the one who kind of, I suppose I'm the one who adds context to things in the podcast. Like, you're fairly free flowing and you'll jump in. So even when you'll make a point about something and I will jump in to say, yes, this is that bit where this happens, because you won't. And for the listener, especially if they haven't seen it, it's useful to say, this is what we're chatting about right here. So I'm the one who kind of, I suppose, has an eye on...
And correcting sometimes.
Yeah.
Like actor's name or something.
Yeah. So I'm the one who kind of has an eye on, the sort of what this is going to sound like later, and how we're going to put it out, because I'm the one who looks after all of that, and I do the editing and everything.
And that is true, and that is great. But I think at the beginning, anyway, I think I was also conscious of our former relationship, and I think I was conscious of wanting to give you room at the beginning and responding to you. Yeah, so you often set the conversation. And I think that came out of somehow overcoming a kind of a previous hierarchical relationship.
It's interesting. Because I take the piss out of you all the time.
I know.
So you never
well, things have changed. I shouldn't probably do that anymore.
Yeah. Let's open it up to audience questions if anyone has anything they would like to ask.
Yes, thank you. I have a lot of questions, but I'm really interested in the editing thing that you were talking about. Like, when did the edit, like, when do you edit and why do you edit? And also from that is the viewership for the listeners. You're saying you've gotten comments. Do you know how much listenership you have? How has it grown? What kind of comments do you get? Do you get comments on like the YouTube? Do you get it on the website? So yeah, those are just some things that I was thinking about.
Those are all my questions, I think.
So editing, first of all, the reason I edit is to make it sound better and to cut out mistakes and silences and ums and ahs. There's a lot of those, and it would just make it much harder to listen to if I left all of that in. I mean, I do want it to be kind of, something that I've at least given a once over. I've put some shape on this. So actually, the edits are pretty extensive. There's probably hundreds of edits per episode, but they're all, well, almost all cutting out silences and things, or cutting out a bit where, I screwed up a word and I repeated it because I knew I'd have the opportunity to replace it later, that sort of thing. Jose, I think, is less conscious of leaving kind of repetitions and things to them.
I'm terrible. I'm often embarrassed listening to myself, and you wonder how you come across in public, because I hem and haw a lot, and I say, you have all these verbal takes, and often, if I'm thinking about something as I respond to Mike, there might be a minute of those. And by the time you get to the point, it really is a minute later.
Yeah, so it improves the experience a lot. Editing all of that kind of stuff out. It's me as well, or it's a mistake you've made in pronouncing someone's name or something like that. There's always just little bits you can improve. So I'll just listen through the whole episode basically, and as it goes, I'll be cutting things out. And I edit. Sometimes I edit at work, although work's got pretty busy now, so I really have to actually work at work these days. But like at home, sort of, it'll be a couple of hours sort of thing. And then it involves, there's also getting the picture for, that goes on the video and goes on the website, which isn't actually always as easy as it seems. Like, you often can think you just copy one off somewhere, but there are kind of resources to help you find good images. And again, I'm good at kind of Google Foo, so I'll find like the highest sort of resolution ones I can, that sort of thing. So hopefully it looks reasonably good. As for comments, we do get comments. Again, it's something I'm in charge of, the social media and putting the podcast up in various places. So I'm the one who'll receive them, and I'll share them with Jose. Mostly they're on YouTube. We did get, I'm not afraid to respond to people. So we do get people saying you don't know what you're talking about or something, and I'll go, okay, well, prove me wrong, and they don't. It's like, if you can say that to me, I'll respond to you. They come back. We did get a comment from one of the filmmakers once. It was a film called Neither Wolf Nor Dog, which was a sort of modern Western set in kind of Indian country in America. And it was about American Indian history. And I didn't think it was a terrible film. Jose did. It was a very very indie film. We saw it at the Mac in Birmingham. And although I had some positive things to say, I was in agreement about some of the negative things. And one of the kind of key issues that we had with it was a kind of American Indian story, but told through a white guy's eyes. It's the white guy who goes and meets and learns about American Indian history and things. And there's a really key scene towards the end where this very, very old American Indian, kind of elder, who they're all real guys. He talks about Wounded Knee and Native American history. But the emotional sort of crux of the scene is that the white guy is crying about it. And that's something we said. And the filmmaker came in and sort of said, well, this is a real story. And was kind of critical about it. It was a short conversation, but it was a real conversation. Like, he had things to say and I responded back to him. That was interesting. And when you get comments, it'll be personally from people, say, speaking directly to you, that I listen to something.
Yes. I'm often surprised because, at least on the face of it, our listenership is not large. And some of the things that we do...
It's in the hundreds, sort of.
Yeah. And some of the things that we have had thousands for, you think it's people thinking they were getting a free film on YouTube. And then found out that it was just a podcast, right? But I'm constantly surprised, like traveling to Bologna and running into people, that will come talk to me about having listened to the podcast in Milwaukee or whatever. So you always get enough of a positive response to kind of keep going, right? Even though, the listenership is not large. Though, I want to say the wonderful thing about podcasting, because aside from this, which I do with Mike, I do two others, right? And I sometimes get into, a vibe about, we did a series just about Youssef Shaheen cinema. And actually, that you were getting responses from the Middle East, the filmmaker of the first film in Saudi Arabia came to want to be on the podcast, right? Like, the reach of these things is really always kind of surprising, right? And it is all about, wanting to join in a conversation, right? Yeah. Or kind of pursue a shared interest right? So, some of the things have been wonderful, as well as it gives you license to speak to anyone you want, right? So if you read a book you like, I often just ring up, if I'm really enthusiastic about the book, you just ring up the person and have a chat with them about it, right? And do a podcast, right? Which would kind of be inconceivable if you didn't. If you didn't have a reason to have that conversation, right?
I'll just say as well, some of the comments we get through YouTube are nice comments. They're not all... it is really nice to...
sorry about all those bad ones.
Because I think it makes a lot of sense, because you've been in kind of film academia and film circles for a long time. You have kind of quite a big network. And so it makes sense when you say, so-and-so had something really nice to say about a podcast. But it always surprises me and makes me feel really good when someone anonymous on YouTube pipes up and says, I found this podcast and I thought it was really good. And I share those with you. It's really nice.
Yes.
I listen to every episode and I probably don't tell you enough when I do, but I listen to every episode religiously of anything I've seen.
Oh, thank you.
That's why if I ever watch them, I was like, oh, Jose and Mike talked about this, and I'll always listen.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. That's good.
Other question?
Yeah. Well, first of all, let me say thank you. It's very good to see you in the flesh.
You too.
But I started listening not a huge amount of time ago, maybe 18 months, something like that. And I sometimes listen before I go to see a film. just to get a sense of it, see if you've liked it, to confirm, whether it's worth going to see that one rather than something else. But what I've especially appreciated is making sense of films afterwards that have left me perplexed. And certainly one of those was The Brutalist, which I have to say I didn't enjoy very much, and I didn't enjoy a great deal more after having listened to it. But I did understand it a lot more.
Thank you.
And I think, having your brother in, Mike,
He was brilliant, wasn't
he
he?
was. It really sort of helped, and highlighting that sort of sub-theme of, violence, allusions to violence, to rape and so on, which you sort of don't necessarily, I didn't properly grasp anyway watching the film. It made sense. So the film I understood much better. And I think, so I wanted to say, thank you for that principally. And, I was going to ask about the reach, how many people sort of listen and different modes of listening, I suppose. Let me make the question qualitative rather than quantitative, because, I sort of pick and choose. I sometimes go back, if I catch a film on DV, I, see is it in amongst the 400 back there and listen. I almost always listen from start to finish.
Wow, thank you.
Not dipping in, because I choose a film I want to, hear you talk about. And I would say the interaction of voices is a great thing too, because, I've always said to you, Jose, you have an actor's voice.
Oh, thank you.
You have a resonant voice, that,
Which actor?
works well.
That's
Mike, you have a different sort of voice, and that's just the musicality, I would say, of your interactions is something that also, aids the sort of, staying with it. So I think if you had similar voices, similar accents, then, maybe it would become a little,
That's interesting.
less engaging, perhaps. But I just wondered, to come back to the qualitative question, I mean, do you know much about, the way people use the podcast? How they use it? Are they regular? Do they listen to every episode, or do they dip in? Do they discover you?
I don't know, really, to be honest. Like I say, I've seen comments from people who say, I just discovered this, I'm going to go and listen to more. I know people who listen to everyone, but they're like family and friends kind of thing. You kind of generally, I don't really have a sense of how regular people are. It's only really when Jose will say, I met some former student who says they listen every week or whatever, then I'll go, oh, right, I had no idea. So yeah, I can tell you that our most popular, most listened to kind of episodes are on films which you might not expect. Like I suppose we kind of would expect like Endgame or something to have a massive kind of listenership because it's such a massive movie. But the biggest ones have been O Fantasma, which is a Portuguese gay cruising film from 2000 or so. And I think because, what else is there on the internet about that, right? If you search it, you'll probably find our podcast, and you're searching it for a reason. Three Identical Strangers, which was a documentary about three identical triplets. I think people have probably seen it, but again, that seems to be something. Maybe that is one where people go, I think I'm probably going to see the film on YouTube. But they do stick around because I really didn't like the film very much, and then they tend to tell me so afterwards. Those are the kind of films that have the biggest listener numbers, I think, because people have gone out looking for those films to for whatever reason.
But even that's, what was it, 18,000 or 20,000 or something?
30 maybe, but it's not loads.
Well, that's pretty big. Yeah.
Well, I guess,
On
I
YouTube,
suppose it depends in what context. Like when did we do O Fantasma? 2018 or 19 maybe. So over sort of 6
Just
years.
think about how many people
Wow.
you reach with that compared to like an academic article in a journal. Do you know what
sure.
I mean?
Yeah.
Like, seriously.
No, I don't turn my nose up at it, but you can't make it. We can't make it the reason that we do it, because if we did, we'd be failures.
Yeah.
Like the listenership isn't that big. It's a very small niche podcast. It's just for us.
It's just for us.
It really is.
But I think Eavesdropping has a much bigger listenership than, for example, the other things that I do, but if you go through those, like Youssef Shaheen podcasts again, it's like 400 people, right? Like, yeah. And again, initially, and you release it and it's like 50, right? and then kind of a couple of years pass by and you see that it continues to increase. I mean, it's not just the day you release it that it has a listenership. It continues, right? So I don't know, I like that. It doesn't have to be massive, to kind of be interesting to do.
Oh, absolutely.
It just has to be worth it for its own sake.
Yeah.
Really.
Emma?
I'm really interested what you said about going to the cinema in the Midlands, because I recently looked into watching Sinners in IMAX around here, and it was really difficult to work out what was true IMAX.
Yes.
There's an IMAX in Birmingham NEC, and
Well,
that's
is
not
there?
a full IMAX. This is the thing that I go through this a lot because, and I suppose I'm the more kind of technically minded of the two of us, so I'm the one who goes out of my way to try and work out. I ask cinemas, are you showing this in IMAX on film? Are you showing it IMAX digitally? So in Birmingham we don't have a true IMAX anymore.
We did, but we no longer do.
It was at Millennium Point, and now that's just called the giant screen, and it no longer shows IMAX films, proper full on IMAX. The IMAX sort of licensed cinemas are the ones on Cineworld Broad Street, which is where we normally go, and in the NEC. And that's that version of IMAX digital. So it's a widescreen image, and it looks lovely. I mean, it is the best screen in Birmingham, but it's not full ratio IMAX, and you just can't get there. You have to go to Manchester or to Bradford or to London,
which we do.
Which we do, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and it's kind of one of those things that it makes a difference, and you're always kind of shocked that people don't see a difference or they don't recognize, they won't admit to a difference, right? Whereas kind of, you see it and are willing to go the distance to experience that. I mean, I also kind of, I have an underlying personal kind of beef, I suppose, which is, if you're interested in film as an art, you want the difference between IMAX and what Mike calls Limax, right?
It's the lack of transparency on it was interesting. You have to actually contact them, because I came across both those Birmingham sites through the IMAX website.
Yeah.
It is licensed.
That's it. That's IMAX's version of. It's basically IMAX's way of earning more money. Essentially, is putting kind of big but essentially regular cinemas in existing multiplexes and be able to sell it as an IMAX experience. But if you really care and what you want to see is the full thing that's the size of 9 houses, then the information out there isn't very good, and they're not very good at that, and they should be better, because that's really what, if you're really interested in that, that's what you want to see. As for kind of other cinemas around Birmingham, like most of the time it's Cineworld Broad Street, and we have our Cineworld cards, and that makes everything cheaper. The more films you see a month, the less they individually cost. We do go to we haven't been to the Mac in a while.
No.
We go to the Mockingbird sometimes, and they're very good at putting on kind of press screenings, or for local press, and or screenings of interesting things,
which we get invited to, by the way, because of the podcast. But we don't often go to, but we do get invited to everything.
We would go more often if I could make it more often, just my working hours. But they're very good, and we've seen some interesting stuff there that isn't getting shown at the bigger cinemas. We saw Caligula, the ultimate cuts, which I probably didn't get shown at Cineworld. We saw that Wim Wenders film, was it Wim Wenders, about cleaning toilets in Japan, which was lovely, which we wouldn't have seen somewhere else. So it is worth always keeping an eye on those for the more interesting films, for the films you're less likely to see in the multiplexes. You do get them in Birmingham. You just get a lot less opportunity to see those films in Birmingham than you do in London.
No,
because the culture is just sort of slightly impoverished in that sense here, unfortunately.
Well, the outlets, there's so few remaining outlets, and the Electric Cinema closing is a huge loss in that, even though I was always very critical of the Electric, because 80% of its programming was the kind of programming you could see at Cineworld or Odeon, right? Like, but actually that 10-20% that they showed that was indie or auteur, hard to see, or underground, is now really severely missed.
And they would host events and things, which is what the Mockingbird does a bit. And that was they're always good. Don't you?
Questions, Jane?
Hi. So very much links to what you've just been talking about. It's a question about the kinds of films that you talk about and the coverage more broadly. I mean, it always impresses me, how in many ways your coverage is really broad, and I really like the kind of some of the philosophy behind it, like going to see a film, for you, Jose, not even knowing what you'll be going to see, but kind of approaching it as a blank slate, and therefore kind of treating something like Argyle as seriously and with as much of a critical eye as you would say an art house film. So, and in terms of that really broad coverage that you have, is that something that just happens naturally and is caused by, what you're invited to, what's showing in Birmingham? Or is there some kind of conscious thought that goes on as well? Say, we've just, talked about a few big blockbusters. We need to have a few art house films. And also, are there kinds of film or types of cinema that you do want to try and cover more often?
I think we're open, and we try to see whatever's in town. Yeah, and we're limited by that, right? Because I mean, often there's things I really want to see, and I just end up seeing them in London, because often what happens is by the time it comes to streaming 8 months later, I've forgotten that I want to see it, right? And I do have a thing about watching things at home, which is it requires a completely different level of concentration. I find it very difficult. You're watching some kind of, I don't know, a slow film that you're desperate to see. Well, actually, it ends up taking you like 3 days if you're watching it at home, right? Like you end up pausing and and it destroys the whole experience. So I think we're, within what's available to see in Birmingham, I think we're pretty open to everything, unless one of us is in a bad mood. I might well say there's some fucking way I'm saying that over.
Well, you didn't even bother asking me to see Wicked with you because you just assumed I would say no. And
Exactly.
I would have gone. And I think Jose thinks that I'm more against musicals than I am. I like a good musical, but I probably wouldn't have enjoyed it that much. But it was. I would have gone with you. But when you said I'm going to see it and do a podcast with someone else, it was amazing how relieved I felt. I didn't realize how much I'd been dreading it. Like most of what we see comes down to what's showing, particularly at Cineworld. We check the listings, what's on this week. I fancy going on this night, whatever. And so most of it is the bigger films. But there's always a possibility of something else. But then when it came to COVID, everything obviously shut down, and so we're going, okay, are we going to continue? What's going to happen? So then we started recording separately and doing it kind of over Zoom. And then it was a case of, well, okay, there's nothing out to the cinema now, we can't go to the cinema, so we can pick kind of the first film I said we should watch was Contagion, which I thought would be hilarious, and it was terrifying. But then we got to pick on, we watched quite a few things on Mubi, which you're particularly a big fan of, which I think at the time was still doing its, I'm not sure it does the 30 days and then it goes anymore.
It doesn't.
It's more of a kind of general streaming service now. But at the time it was doing that 30 days and put that time pressure on you to see something good before it went. And we caught a couple of things doing that. And we saw some really interesting films doing that, watching them at home. But obviously you always prefer to see something at the cinema. But I suppose, doing that for a few months did go to show how much stuff we're not getting at the cinema here.
Sure.
So that's interesting. So you would watch things on streaming when forced to, but it's not something that you've continued in order to be able to see a certain kind of film. Because you will be if you're at the mercy of what's coming. Yeah, you will. There will obviously be films that you'll never get to review.
Yeah. Well, there's also I would also I'd say there is a difference between watching something on streaming and watching something made for streaming. Like that's what I really object to is the films which are just filling an internet gap. Whereas what's being shown on Mubi is these are films made to go in cinemas. Yeah. And they're being provided to us through a streaming service. That's the only way we're going to see them.
But you don't tend to do them now, do you?
No, mostly not. Mostly we are still seeing things at the cinema.
Though now the problems have kind of become, different, right? Like I was ill for a while, so we didn't do some for a while. And, kind of life things do also, affect kind of what you see and the regularity of it. And it just has a life of its own. I mean, sometimes you just get into a groove. I mean, there was this whole period where I forget for what reasons we look at William Friedkin films. And we kind of went through kind of all of his career, really. I think it was maybe...
That might have been COVID.
It might have, yeah, I think so. There are kind of, just...
Yeah, and actually in COVID again, when they were trying to reopen the cinemas a few months after the first lockdown, because Tenet was coming out, one of the ways in which they tried to get people back into the cinema was by showing Christopher Nolan's other blockbusters, and so we saw all the Batman films and Inception and Interstellar and Podcast and all those. So that became a little season of Nolan in the run up to Tenet.
And Mike is often very kind in allowing me to do things for my classes. So little things like, to do a session on Casablanca, right? Or Lubitsch, or, and that is kind of the idea of having a conversation on things that, students could then listen to if they want to after the seminar or whatever. So it has many uses. Though I don't know about uses, you're never sure if anybody listens to it actually, but
Jake, you had a question?
I've got three little questions actually about the kind of the process of the making podcast. I'd be interested to know whether you sort of feel that you're watching films differently if you know that you're going to make a podcast versus just watching films for leisure or for what the many reasons that we watch films. I'm interested in the period after the film when you're driving to Jose's and whether you've got a sense of whether the film you've just seen is going to make for a particularly productive podcast or not. And I'm interested in whether the process of recording the podcast and sort of how enjoyable and edifying that experience is necessarily corresponds to how successful you feel the podcast that comes out of it is.
I think...
What was the first one?
So, whether you watch films differently.
Oh yeah,
because you're doing a podcast on it.
Yeah, there was a gap between leaving uni and then starting the podcast where I clearly kind of fallen out of a certain way of watching movies that university had taught me to. I came to university for a reason, and this course really suited me, but it also taught me to watch films more attentively and with an eye on different things and so on. And then, while I've always been that kind of person, it sort of falls away when you're not doing it every day. And then when it got back to the podcast, or when the podcast started rather, and we started doing it regularly, I did find that picking up again, I would start to take notes and things sometimes. And yeah, I mean, it makes you a more attentive viewer. I think, you're looking for things to remember. You're in the moment, I think, wondering, you'll notice the way that you're feeling, you'll notice the way something looks, and you'll be thinking about it to the point where sometimes I get, I miss something else happens because my mind's on something that I'm already thinking about. I'm sure everyone has this kind of experience, but you are also thinking like, I better remember that for later because that'll be something to talk about. Like the podcast isn't formatted really, it just has that introduction and then we're off on talking whatever we want to talk about. But I will try to remember, okay, now I want to talk about this. Now I want to talk about this because this was something I picked up on. I don't know if you do something similar when you're...
I don't do any of that. I mean, I don't see films differently. I'm not conscious of it. I mean, I'm conscious of Mike's responses. Yeah, we're often seated together at cinema. I can kind of tell if he's bored or, and we'll often talk about that in the podcast, where you're bored in the scene or whatever. So I think that's the only difference. Otherwise, I think I watch the film in exactly the same way. The weird thing about doing a podcast is that once you sit down and begin talking, you forget that you're doing it for public, right? So I think we just have the kind of conversation we'd have naturally. And actually to the point that sometimes you forget and you say something that will prove very embarrassing. And then, so our deal is Mike does the editing and then, I listen to it and I say if there's any changes. I mean, usually I listen to it and I think 99.9% of the time I don't think there's anything to be changed.
Yeah.
But there's always that possibility or Mike will have already taken the most embarrassing thing or the thing that might come across as contentious in a way that I didn't intend. Right. So, but actually that's a safety mechanism because I really don't think about that at all. It's just, you're having a conversation. I mean, And sometimes I think the only thing is I sometimes get a bit restless, you know. I want Mike to wrap it up and go home. Yeah, because so I suppose there's that social thing. It always takes place in my house, right? And sometimes by the end of the conversation, you're thinking, I need to get up. I need to have this done. Yeah, I'm doing this tomorrow, right? And I only have an hour left. Yeah, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So, but those are mundane.
But I'm always going, I've got 4 more things I need to say.
Yeah. So that's, a particular dynamic. And it's a good dynamic, actually, because, as I said, I do podcasts with other people, and you notice the difference. It's just a different conversation with somebody else who brings something, to it as well. But it is just very different. I mean,
Well, what I would say is, because you do podcasts with other people and you're the host of those, and ours is joint, but in the sense that I do the introduction and the outro, I'm kind of a host in quotes.
Yeah, you are, yeah.
And as I say, I'm never really out of my head doing it. I'm always got one eye on the computer. I've got one eye on, will this sound good? How are we going to frame this?
Yeah.
And you are just getting lost in your own thoughts.
Or thinking about biscuits or coffee or something.
But then when you're doing podcasts and you're the host with other people, do you think about the podcast differently when you're doing it?
Yes, I do, but the reason why is, sometimes when I do it with Richard, it's so short, right? Like you think, we've only been talking for 20 minutes. It can't end here. And then, so you're conscious, like, you have to make at least half an hour. I don't know why. Yeah. But I think maybe because ours are just so free floating, like you think kind of, this is a classic film. You can't just, must have more things, to say, right? So that's just a different dynamic, really.
Yeah. The second part was to do with coming home after the cinema.
Whether you have a sense of when you're not talking about the film, do you have said, okay, this is going to make for a good podcast, or conversely, I don't know what
there are definitely times when I think, oh, this will be good. I think I've got a lot to say. Or we were responding really differently in the cinema, and there's going to be some sort of sparks or something. But like I say, there are also times when I'm going, I don't know that I've got anything on this, and then I'm surprised when we have the conversation that stuff starts coming out. Like, I didn't realize there would be something good about that. I mean, there have been very few times when we haven't put a podcast out. I mean, vanishingly few. We didn't put a podcast out on Deadpool 2 because the film made us really angry. And the podcast was genuinely impossible to. I think we cut it short when we were doing it. We were like, I fucking, and we just stopped. Like, we're not going out. And I just did a tweet explaining why there wouldn't be one.
But that makes me want to listen to it.
Yeah, no, you don't want to.
That was my view.
Your Space Jam was particularly memorable for that. The new Space Jam. I think you both hated.
I think I still mean to make him watch the old one. But I don't think he'll agree to it. So yeah, I mean, we will put everything ends up being worth it. But yeah, you are sometimes going, I don't know what I'm going to say about this, and it's a surprise when you do. And the last part was
just sort of as you're sort of recording the podcast, are you aware of is there a correspondence between how enjoyable that conversation is, how kind of illuminating that conversation is, and how the podcast actually turns out? The process of doing it versus the products that comes out of that process.
That's interesting. I've never really thought about it that way. I once we get into it, I tend to find they're all enjoyable. Once you got past that occasional first thing of wondering where we'll go with this, if we've got anywhere to go, I don't think I find much to differentiate, except for those few times when it has got sort of contentious and like I say, Deadpool we never put out. The Irishman we cut out 20 minutes of arguing. So like I suppose that it can get to a point where you've got to be aware enough that actually something isn't going to sound good or something's not productive. Most of the time it just is though, and it's really enjoyable. I think that's fundamentally it.
I mean, I don't care about any of that. I mean, my interest is in the conversation. Right, like kind of, because I do think a conversation is an exchange. You're learning from the other person. You're seeing things in a different way. Yeah, is it making you kind of think about what you've just experienced? Really, I don't even like listening to them afterwards. Right, like so. I mean, I'll do it out of respect for Mike's labor and having done all the editing, and of course the other ones I edit myself. Right, but I never listen to them again. I mean, I think, for me, the value of it is that conversation, which you hope other people will find interesting, yeah, and kind of, maybe illuminating, yeah, but kind of, I don't think about anything else really.
Have you say you've never gone back to one for teaching purposes, for example, to like thinking of teaching a more contemporary film and go, oh, we reviewed that, I'll go and listen. And
I sometimes put it in, but I don't listen to it beforehand. I mean, it's just something, that, I mean, some I have done on purpose for students on classic films. But, if we reviewed something that then I end up teaching for some reason, I will just put the podcast as a suggestion for them. But actually, I don't. I mean, Mike will listen to old stuff. Yeah, like
I listen back to it. It's
yeah.
my favorite podcast.
Yeah, I kind of, I sometimes will. So because sometimes I don't even remember that we've podcast on something. So someone will mention a film. I say, oh, I've never heard of it. And then you realize you've done a podcast, right? Like, yeah. So that, I sometimes do go back for that, right? It's almost like a set of note-taking that is just oral. That, yeah. So in that sense, I might, but it would have to be a purpose-driven. If I'm writing on something that, it then becomes useful in a different way. But I almost never listen to our old podcasts.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I like the way that your process captures the sort of the immediacy of the cinematic experience. You watch the film together, you drive to Jose's house, and then you discuss the film sort of immediately. But I was just wondering, are there ever times where there's a film, and I was just conscious of Stephen's comment on the Bruce list, where you think, gosh, do you know, that film had a big impact on me. I need a bit of distance, take a bit of time to digest it. Because a few times I watch a film in the evening and then sleep on it, and I wake up the next morning, I think, oh my God, I think I've seen a different film. I'm just wondering, are there times where actually after the event you think, gosh, I needed a bit more time before we did that podcast?
For me, definitely. It is a very particular way of doing it, and there are often times when I'll revisit a film, having said certain things about it on podcast, and see it completely differently the second time. What was I thinking? I became very conscious of trying not to say that a film had nothing to say or like was kind of dumb or whatever. Particularly Marvel films, I found this with, where Marvel films won't tend to be saying much that's extremely complex, but they will have themes that they're working through, and I won't see it the first time. I'll just go, here's a load of sound and fury, and then you go back and go, no, I missed what it was doing, and so I've tried to become more conscious of making those kind of statements instead. I'll go, I don't get it right now. And then we did do 2 podcasts that became one big podcast on Avengers Endgame, which did involve, I think, sleeping on it. And I don't know that we saw it twice, but we talked about it again the next day, and that was interesting. And there have been very few occasions where, having finished recording a podcast, I've thought of something that I didn't think to say at the time, but because the podcast hasn't gone out yet, the next time I see Jose, I can record an extra bit and put it in, and no one knows. So I was able to fit in my extra thoughts. But
but I think your question, I mean, I find it interesting because it kind of presupposes that you want to be right about a film. Yeah, there's obviously a difference if you're watching it once or if you watch it twice, those are all different experiences. And in a way, I don't care about that, right? Like, I mean, I think there's just a value in giving your immediate responses. You don't have to be right about anything, really. Yeah, but I think the conversation around it hopefully is interesting, right? And of course, if you see it again and you reflect 3 days later, that's a different conversation. I mean, and actually maybe not a better one or a worse one or whatever. It's just a different one. Yeah.
But it's like that thing of experience that you were talking about. It's like criticism is kind of the art of trying to articulate your experience, and you would just be reporting on a different experience. You know what I mean? That's the experience immediately after, and then how do you experience it a week later or a month later or after 3 viewings or something, isn't it? But each would have its own interest. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I love I mean, that's one of the reasons. I mean, I love when we look at old films, right? Because some of them you've seen 20 times, right? Like, I mean, and they continue to reveal different things. And yeah, and often the conversation is about that, right? What did you notice this time that you hadn't noticed before, right? But, again, it's just a different conversation.
Any last questions?
All right. Well, thank you all very much.
Yeah, well, thank you very much. Thank you for...
All right.